The galaxy was on the edge of chaos. War loomed like a storm cloud, dark and heavy, ready to burst at any moment. On a space station orbiting a distant planet, two people sat in a quiet conference room, their faces lit by the soft glow of a holographic map hovering between them. Daniel Carter leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Across the table, Elena Ruiz tapped her fingers lightly on the smooth metal surface, her eyes scanning the data displayed before them. Daniel was not a man who enjoyed sitting still. A soldier by training, he had spent most of his life moving, from one battlefield to another. His hands were calloused, his face lined with the weight of years spent fighting for survival. Now, though, he found himself in an unfamiliar role. Negotiator. The thought made him uneasy. He trusted actions more than words, weapons more than promises. But here he was, seated across from Elena, trying to find a way to avoid bloodshed. Elena, on the other hand, thrived in situations like this. She had always been good with words, able to weave them into something powerful enough to sway even the hardest hearts. Her calm demeanor masked the intensity burning inside her. She knew what was at stake. If they failed, it would mean war, not just a skirmish or a border dispute, but a full-scale conflict that could destroy everything humanity had worked so hard to build among the stars. The Valans were the problem, or perhaps the solution, depending on how things went. They were an alien species, tall and graceful, with shimmering skin that seemed to reflect light in strange ways. Their technology was advanced, their motives unclear. For months now, tensions between humans and Valans had been escalating. Skirmishes along the borders of their territories had claimed lives on both sides. Rumors swirled about hidden agendas, secret weapons, and ancient grudges. No one really knew why the Valans had come to this part of the galaxy, but everyone agreed on one thing: they couldn't be trusted. At least that's what most people thought. Elena wasn't so sure. She believed there was still a chance to make peace, to find common ground. It wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to try. Daniel, however, had his doubts. He'd seen too much violence, too much suffering. To him, the Valans were just another enemy waiting to strike. "They're watching us," Elena said, suddenly breaking the silence. Her voice was soft but firm. "Every move we make, every word we say, they're analyzing it all." Daniel frowned. "So, let them watch. We've got nothing to hide." "It's not about hiding," Elena replied, leaning forward slightly. "It's about showing them we're serious, that we're willing to listen. If we go into this meeting, acting like we already know what they want, we'll lose before we even start." Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't like being lectured, especially when it came to strategy. But he also knew Elena had a point. This wasn't a battlefield where brute force would win the day. It was a delicate dance, one misstep away from disaster. As they prepared for the upcoming meeting with the Valan ambassador, news arrived that threw everything into disarray. One of humanity's outposts near Vega had been attacked. The details were sketchy, but initial reports suggested heavy casualties. The attackers hadn't left behind much evidence, but suspicion immediately fell on the Valans. Daniel felt his jaw tighten as he read the report. "This changes things," he muttered, tossing the tablet onto the table. "If they're hitting us now while we're trying to talk, then what's the point of even sitting down with them?" Elena picked up the tablet, her expression unreadable, as she scanned the information. "We don't know it was them," she said finally. "Not for sure. Who else could it be?" Daniel shot back, his voice rising. "They're the ones who've been pushing us, testing our defenses. You think this is some kind of coincidence?" "I think jumping to conclusions won't help us," Elena replied sharply. "If we accuse them without proof, we'll only give them an excuse to walk away from the table. Is that what you want?" Daniel clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. He wanted to act, to hit back hard and fast. But he also knew Elena was right. Acting without evidence would only make things worse. Still, it was hard to sit still when lives were being lost. Back aboard the human flagship, the mood was grim. Captain Ryan Harper paced the bridge, his boots clicking against the metal floor. A veteran of countless battles, Harper had little patience for diplomacy. To him, the Valens were nothing more than invaders, and the sooner they were dealt with, the better. "We can't just sit here and do nothing," Harper growled, turning to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Grace Bennett. "If we don't respond, they'll see it as weakness." Grace stood calmly beside him, her arms folded neatly behind her back. Unlike Harper, she believed in giving peace a chance. "And if we attack without knowing for certain who's responsible, we risk starting a war we can't win," she countered. "Is that what you want? To gamble everything on a hunch?" Harper glared at her but didn't argue. He respected Grace's judgment even if he didn't always agree with her. Still, the pressure was mounting. Other fleet commanders were calling for immediate retaliation, and it was getting harder to hold them back. Meanwhile, whispers of betrayal began to circulate. Someone had leaked classified information about the outpost's location and defenses. How else could the attackers have struck so precisely? Daniel and Elena heard the rumors during their briefings and meetings. At first, they dismissed them as paranoia, but as more details emerged, they started to wonder, could there be a traitor among them? The possibility weighed heavily on both of them. If someone within their own ranks was working against them, then no amount of diplomacy would matter. Trust was already fragile enough without adding internal sabotage to the mix. Despite the growing tension, preparations for the meeting with the Velan ambassador continued. Daniel and Elena reviewed every detail, rehearsing their arguments and anticipating potential objections. They knew this might be their last chance to prevent war. Failure was not an option. When the day finally arrived, they entered the designated chamber with a mixture of hope and dread. The room was stark and utilitarian, with cold metal walls and glowing panels casting eerie shadows. Ambassador Kyle awaited them, his towering form radiating an aura of quiet authority. His eyes, a deep shade of blue, seemed to pierce through them, reading their thoughts before they even spoke. "Humans," Kyle began, his voice resonating like a low hum. "You have called for this meeting. Speak your purpose." Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. "We seek understanding," she said. "A way to coexist without further bloodshed." Kyle tilted his head slightly, studying her with those piercing eyes. "Coexistence requires trust," he replied. "Do you offer that?" Daniel shifted, uncomfortably, his instincts screaming at him to stay alert. He didn't trust Kale, not completely, but he also knew that walking away now would mean abandoning any chance of peace. "We're willing to try," Elena answered, glancing briefly at Daniel for support. He nodded reluctantly, though his expression remained guarded. For a moment the room was silent, the weight of unspoken fears hanging thick in the air. Then Kale spoke again, his tone softer but no less intense. "Then let us begin. But know this, time is short. My people grow restless. If progress is not made soon, others may take matters into their own hands." With those ominous words, the meeting commenced. As Daniel and Elena navigated the treacherous waters of negotiation, they couldn't shake the feeling that unseen forces were pulling strings behind the scenes. Somewhere, someone was playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than anyone realized. The meeting with Ambassador Kyle unfolded in a room that felt colder than it should have been. The air was heavy, not just with the chill of the chamber but with the weight of unspoken fears and hidden agendas. Elena Ruiz stood tall, her voice calm as she addressed the Valen ambassador. Daniel Carter, standing slightly behind her, kept his eyes fixed on Kale, watching for any sign of deception. He didn't trust the Valans, not after what had happened at the outpost near Vega, but he also knew that walking away now would mean abandoning the fragile hope of peace. Kale's glowing blue eyes scanned both humans, as if trying to read their thoughts. "You claim to seek coexistence," he said, his deep voice echoing in the chamber. "Yet your people attack us without provocation." Elena shook her head firmly. "We don't know who attacked you, or us. That's why we're here. To find answers, not to trade accusations." Kale paused, his expression unreadable. For a moment it seemed like he might refuse to continue. Then slowly he spoke again. There are factions among my people who do not believe peace is possible. They see your kind as invaders, unworthy of trust. Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to demand proof. But Elena's hand moved subtly to rest on his arm, a silent signal to stay quiet. She turned back to Kyle, her tone measured. And there are factions among ours who feel the same way. If we let fear guide us, then war is inevitable. We're here because we believe there's another path. Kale tilted his head slightly, studying them both. Perhaps, he said finally. But trust must be earned, not given freely. As the meeting continued, Kale revealed fragments of information about rogue elements within his own ranks. Warriors, who viewed humanity as a threat rather than a potential ally. These radicals, he explained, were likely responsible for the attack on Vega. But there was more. Kale hinted at a third party manipulating events from the shadows, sowing discord between humans and Vaylons alike. Someone was playing both sides, against each other, turning suspicion into hostility. When the meeting ended, Daniel and Elena left the chamber feeling uneasy. The pieces didn't fit together neatly, and the gaps in Kale's story only added to their frustration. As they walked back to their quarters, Elena broke the silence. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" she asked. Daniel shrugged. "Maybe. But even if he is, it doesn't change the fact that someone out there is working hard to make sure we fail." Back aboard the human flagship, tensions were reaching a boiling point. Captain Ryan Harper paced the bridge, his face red with anger. Reports of sabotage had surfaced. Classified intel leaked to the enemy, defenses compromised. It wasn't just the attack on Vega anymore, it was something bigger, darker. Harper slammed his fist onto the console. "This isn't just bad luck. Someone's feeding them information." Lieutenant Grace Bennett stood nearby, her arms crossed. Unlike Harper, she preferred caution over action. "We don't know that for sure," she said. "Accusing our own people without evidence will only make things worse." Harper glared at her. "You think I care about making things worse? If we don't act, we'll lose everything." Grace held his gaze, her voice steady.
"And if we accuse the wrong person, we'll lose trust. Is that what you want? To turn on each other while the real enemy watches and laughs?" Her words struck a nerve, but Harper didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, muttering under
his breath. The crew on the bridge exchanged nervous glances. Everyone could feel the pressure mounting. Rumors of betrayal spread like wildfire, fueled by paranoia and fear. Who could they trust? Who was leaking secrets? The questions hung in, the air unanswered. Meanwhile, intelligence operatives worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. Hidden cameras, intercepted communications, and encrypted files, all were scrutinized for any clue that might lead to the traitor. It was slow, painstaking work, but eventually, a pattern began to emerge. A junior analyst named Matthew Cole had accessed sensitive data shortly before the attack on Vega. His movements matched suspicious activity recorded in secure areas of the station. When confronted, Cole denied everything at first. But under intense questioning, cracks began to show. His alibi didn't hold up, and inconsistencies in his statements piled up. Finally, he broke down, confessing under duress. "I didn't have a choice," he cried, tears streaming down his face. "They threatened my family. Said they'd hurt them if I didn't cooperate." "Who threatened you?" Elena demanded, her voice sharp. She and Daniel had joined the interrogation, determined to get answers. Cole hesitated, his hands trembling. "A syndicate," he admitted. "Off-world. They've been funding attacks, stirring up trouble between us and the Vaylons. They profit from war." Daniel leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Names. Give us names." Cole shook his head frantically. "I don't know. I swear. I never met anyone directly. Everything went through intermediaries, messages, drop-offs. It was all anonymous." Despite the lack of concrete leads, Cole's confession sent shockwaves through the station. The idea that an outside group was manipulating events from the shadows was chilling. It meant the conflict wasn't just about humans versus Vaylons. was part of something much larger, something far more dangerous. As news of Cole's arrest spread, reactions varied. Some saw it as proof that humanity couldn't afford to trust anyone, not even its own people. Others argued that it highlighted the need for unity, for setting aside differences to fight a common enemy. Amidst the chaos, Daniel found himself torn. Part of him wanted to lash out, to hunt down those responsible and make them pay. But another part, the part influenced by Elena, knew that revenge wouldn't solve anything. It would only deepen the cycle of violence. Elena, meanwhile, struggled to maintain her composure. The revelation of the syndicate's involvement complicated everything. How could they negotiate peace when shadowy forces were actively working to destroy it? Yet she refused to give up. "If we let fear dictate our actions," she told Daniel one evening, "then we've already lost. We have to keep moving forward no matter how hard it gets." Daniel nodded, though his expression remained grim. "I just hope we're not too late." The next day, Elena proposed a bold plan. She suggested forming a joint investigation team with the Valons, tasked with uncovering the truth behind the attacks and exposing the syndicate's operations. It was a risky move, one that required putting aside old animosities and working side by side with former adversaries. But Elena believed it was the only way to build genuine trust and perhaps prevent a full-scale war. Daniel listened carefully as she outlined her proposal. He wasn't convinced it would work, but he respected Elena's determination. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it. But if this goes south, don't say I didn't warn you." With tentative approval from both sides, preparations for the joint investigation began. The team consisted of humans and Valons, each bringing their unique skills to the table. Commander Liren, a high-ranking Valon officer, led the alien contingent. Tall and imposing, Liren carried himself with quiet authority, his glowing eyes scanning every detail with precision. As the team gathered in the briefing room, Daniel couldn't help but feel uneasy. Trusting the Valons still felt unnatural, to him, like shaking hands with a snake. But he reminded himself of what was at stake. If this mission succeeded, it could pave the way for lasting peace. If it failed, well, failure wasn't an option. Their first lead took them to a remote asteroid colony, a desolate place used primarily for mining operations. Intelligence reports suggested it served as a base of operations for the syndicate. The journey was tense, everyone aware of the dangers ahead. When they arrived, the colony appeared abandoned, its corridors eerily silent. But appearances could be deceiving. As they moved deeper into the facility, they discovered evidence of recent activity: experimental weapons, advanced technology, and records implicating high-ranking officials from both species in funding the syndicate's operations. It was a shocking revelation, one that threatened to unravel everything they thought they knew. Suddenly, alarms blared, shattering the silence. Mercenaries hired to protect the facility emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. Chaos erupted as the team scrambled for cover. Bullets ricocheted off metal walls, sparks flying in every direction. Daniel found himself fighting alongside Liren, their combined efforts driving back the attackers. For the first time, Daniel felt a flicker of respect for the Valon commander. Together they managed to secure critical evidence linking the syndicate to key leaders in both governments. But victory came at a cost. During the retreat, Grace Bennett sacrificed herself to cover their escape, buying precious seconds for the rest of the team to flee. Her death hit Daniel hard. It was a stark reminder of the price being paid for this fragile truce. As they returned to the space station, the weight of their discovery settled over them. The evidence painted a damning picture, exposing corruption at the highest levels. Yet even as public outrage mounted, whispers of dissent continued to swirl. Not everyone wanted peace. Not when war promised power and profit. For Daniel, the journey had changed him in ways he never expected. He realized that true strength lay not in conquest, but in the courage to extend a hand, even when it trembled. As he watched Elena address the assembled crowd, he felt a rare sense of pride. not just in humanity, but in the fragile bonds they'd forged with the Valons. The evidence gathered from the asteroid colony was overwhelming. Experimental weapons capable of leveling entire cities, detailed records of bribes paid to high-ranking officials, and encrypted communications linking key figures from both human and Valan governments to the shadowy syndicate. It all painted a chilling picture. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about rogue factions or isolated acts of sabotage. It was a vast conspiracy designed to keep humanity and the Valons locked in perpetual conflict. Back aboard the space station, Daniel Carter sat alone in his quarters, staring at the wall as if it might offer some kind of answer. His mind replayed the events on the asteroid, the ambush, the firefight, Grace Bennett's final moments. She had given her life so the team could escape, and now her empty chair haunted every briefing room, every meeting, every decision. Her sacrifice weighed heavily on him, not just because she was gone, but because it reminded him how fragile their mission truly was. One wrong move, one misstep, and everything they had worked for could crumble. Elena Ruiz, too, felt the burden of what they had uncovered. She spent hours poring over the documents, searching for connections, patterns, anything that might help. Them expose the truth. But the deeper she dug, the more complicated it became. Some of the names listed in the records belonged to people she had trusted, advisors, diplomats, even military leaders. How far did this web of corruption stretch? Who else might be involved? And most importantly, how could they reveal the truth without causing panic or sparking outright rebellion? When they finally presented their findings to the Joint Human-Valan Council, the reaction was explosive. Accusations flew across the room like daggers. Human representatives pointed fingers at the Valans, accusing them of orchestrating the attacks to weaken Earth's defenses. Valan delegates countered with claims that humans had deliberately provoked their forces to justify aggression. Tempers flared, voices rose, and for a moment it seemed like the fragile peace talks would collapse entirely. Elena stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "Enough!" she shouted, her tone sharp enough to silence the room. "This isn't about blame, it's about survival. If we don't work together to stop whoever is behind this, none of us will survive." Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Slowly, the shouting died down, replaced by uneasy silence. Ambassador Kale, who had been watching quietly from his seat, nodded slightly in agreement. "She speaks wisely," he said, his deep voice resonant. "We cannot allow division to consume us while our true enemies remain hidden." Daniel watched as the tension in the room shifted. For the first time, there was a glimmer of unity. Not perfect, not complete, but enough to keep moving forward. Together, they agreed to release the evidence publicly, exposing the corruption within their own ranks. It was a risky move, one that could destabilize both governments, but it was also necessary. Without transparency, trust would be impossible. The announcement sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy. News outlets buzzed with reports of betrayal and conspiracy, fueling outrage among the general population. Protests erupted on Earth and several human colonies, demanding accountability from their leaders. Meanwhile, the Valan homeworld saw similar unrest, with citizens calling for reforms and justice. In the midst of the turmoil, however, something unexpected began to emerge, a shared sense of anger. Humans and Valans alike realized they had been pawns in someone else's game, manipulated into hating each other while the real culprits profited from their suffering. But not everyone welcomed the revelation. Powerful figures implicated in the scandal fought back fiercely, using their influence to discredit the evidence and sow doubt. Rumors spread that the investigation team had fabricated the documents to seize power. Others claimed the syndicate itself was a myth, a convenient excuse created by opportunists seeking to overthrow established orders. Amidst the confusion, trust remained fragile, teetering on the edge of collapse. On the human flagship, Captain Ryan Harper struggled to maintain control. Morale among the crew was low, shaken by the revelations and divided opinions about what should come next. Some argued for immediate action against the syndicate, while others believed focusing on internal reform was more important. Harper himself leaned toward the former, convinced that striking back hard and fast was the only way to regain momentum. Lieutenant Grace Bennett's death still burned fresh in his memory, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Grace's absence left a void, not just in Harper's command structure, but in the hearts of those who had served under her. Her calm demeanor and unwavering dedication had earned her respect from everyone aboard the ship. Now her empty workstation served as a stark reminder of the cost of failure. Even Harper, who rarely showed emotion, found himself pausing sometimes to glance at the spot where she used to stand. Meanwhile, Daniel and Elena worked tirelessly to keep the peace process alive. They organized town hall meetings, addressing concerns from ordinary citizens and encouraging dialogue between humans and Vaylons. It wasn't easy. Many were skeptical, unwilling to let go of years of animosity. But small victories began to add up. A shared meal here, a cooperative project there. Slowly, bonds started to form, tentative but real. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of negotiations, Daniel found himself standing beside Elena on an observation deck overlooking the stars. Neither spoke for a long time, content to simply watch the endless expanse of space stretching out before them. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Do you think we're making a difference?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Elena turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful. "I think we're trying," she replied, "and sometimes that's all you can do." Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze returning to the stars. He didn't feel hopeful exactly, but he did feel something else, a quiet determination. Maybe they couldn't fix everything. Maybe they couldn't undo decades of mistrust overnight, but as long as they kept pushing forward, kept fighting for understanding instead of vengeance, there was a chance, however small, that things could change. The next morning brought news that renewed their resolve. Intelligence operatives had traced one of the syndicate's operations to a remote moon orbiting a dying star. It was a dangerous location, riddled with radiation and unstable terrain, but it offered a rare opportunity to strike back at the shadowy organization responsible for so much destruction. A decision had to be made quickly. Should they send a strike team to dismantle the operation, risking further violence, or focus on diplomacy and rebuilding trust? Elena argued passionately for restraint. "Every act of aggression gives them ammunition," she said during a heated strategy session. "If we attack blindly, we'll lose the moral high ground." Daniel, however, wasn't so sure. "We can't just sit back and let them operate freely," he countered. "They've killed too many people already. If we have a chance to stop them, we have to take it." In the end, a compromise was reached. A small, highly trained team, including both humans and Vaylons, would infiltrate the moon base with strict orders to minimize casualties and gather intelligence rather than engage in open combat. Daniel volunteered to lead the mission, despite Elena's protests. "Someone has to make sure it's done right," he told her firmly, "and I'm not letting anyone else take the risk." As the team prepared for departure, tensions ran high. Commander Liren, the Vaylon officer who had fought alongside Daniel on the asteroid, approached him before boarding the shuttle. "You understand the stakes," Liren said, his glowing eyes fixed on Daniel. "Failure means war." "I know," Daniel replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "That's why we're going to succeed." With that, they boarded the shuttle and launched into the void, heading toward the unknown. The journey was tense, every member of the team aware of the danger ahead. When they arrived at the moon, its surface barren and desolate, they moved swiftly, slipping past automated defenses and avoiding detection. Inside the base, they discovered evidence of horrific experiments, biological weapons designed to target specific genetic traits, ensuring maximum devastation with minimal effort. It was a sobering reminder of what they were up against. As they worked to disable the facility, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The syndicate was vast, its reach extending far beyond a single moon or outpost. Destroying this base wouldn't end the threat, but it was a start. a step toward dismantling the machinery of fear and hatred that had driven humanity and the Veilans apart for so long. When the mission ended and the team returned to the space station, they carried with them not just data and samples, but a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. Not certainty, not victory, but the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to break the cycle of violence and build something better. And so, amidst uncertainty and lingering fears, a new chapter began. One where diplomats spoke, soldiers stood ready, and humanity held its breath, daring to believe in a brighter tomorrow. The mission to the remote moon had been a success, but it came at a cost. The team returned battered and exhausted, their faces etched with the strain of what they had seen and done. Inside the Syndicate's base, they had uncovered horrors beyond imagination. Biological weapons designed to target specific genetic traits capable of wiping out entire populations without mercy. It was a chilling reminder of how far some would go to maintain control through fear and destruction. But the evidence they gathered was undeniable proof of the Syndicate's existence and its role in fomenting conflict between humans and Veilans. Aboard the space station, Daniel Carter walked through the corridors, his boots echoing softly against the metal floor. His body ached from the mission, but it was nothing compared to the weight in his chest. He replayed every moment in his mind: the stealthy infiltration, the tension of avoiding detection, the cold efficiency of the enemy's operations, and then there were the faces of his teammates, human and Veilan alike, working together despite years of distrust. For the first time, Daniel felt a flicker of something he hadn't expected: respect for the Veilans. Commander Lirin, in particular, had proven himself not just as a capable leader, but as someone willing to put aside old grudges for the greater good. Elena Ruiz was waiting for him in the briefing room when he arrived. Her expression was grim, her eyes tired but focused. She had spent hours reviewing the data brought back from the moon, piecing together the scope of the Syndicate's operations. "It's worse than we thought," she said as Daniel took a seat across from her. "This isn't just about one faction or one group. It's a network spread across multiple systems. They've been operating for decades." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So what do? We can't take them all down at once." "No," Elena agreed, shaking her head. "But we can start dismantling their influence, expose them publicly, cut off their funding, and isolate their operatives. If we can show people the truth, maybe we can turn the tide." It sounded simple enough, but both of them knew it wouldn't be easy. The Syndicate wasn't just powerful, it was deeply entrenched in the fabric of galactic society. Its tendrils reached into governments, corporations, and even military organizations. Rooting it out would require patience, precision, and an unshakable commitment to transparency. Any misstep could undo everything they had worked for so far. As word of the mission's success spread, reactions varied. Among ordinary citizens, outrage grew louder. Protests erupted on Earth and other colonies, demanding justice for those who had been manipulated and betrayed. On the Veilan homeworld, similar demonstrations called for reform and accountability. For the first time, humans and Veilans found themselves united, not by friendship but by shared anger toward a common enemy. It was a fragile alliance, built on emotion rather than trust, but it was progress nonetheless. However, not everyone welcomed the revelations. Powerful figures implicated in the scandal fought back fiercely, using their considerable resources to discredit the investigation team and sow doubt. Media outlets loyal to the Syndicate spread lies, claiming the evidence had been fabricated to seize power. Some even accused Daniel, Elena, and their team of being part of the conspiracy themselves. The accusations stung, but they also hardened the resolve of those fighting for change. On the human flagship, Captain Ryan Harper struggled to keep morale intact. The crew was divided, torn between loyalty to their leaders and outrage over the corruption that had been exposed. Lieutenant Grace Bennett's death still loomed large in everyone's minds, a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Harper himself wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to lash out, to strike back at the syndicate with overwhelming force. But another part, the quieter, more rational side, knew that violence alone wouldn't solve anything. He turned to Lieutenant James Cole, Grace's replacement, for advice. "What do you think?" Harper asked during a private meeting. "Should we push harder or hold back?" Cole hesitated before answering. He was younger than Grace, less experienced, but he shared her calm demeanor and thoughtful approach. "We've already shown strength by taking down that base," he said carefully. "Now we need to show restraint. If we rush in blindly, we'll play right into their hands." Harper frowned but nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But if they make another move, we hit back twice as hard." Meanwhile, Elena proposed a bold new strategy, creating a coalition of independent investigators, journalists, and activists dedicated to rooting out the syndicate's influence. These individuals would operate outside official channels, free from political pressure or interference. Their goal would be to gather evidence, expose wrongdoing, and hold those responsible accountable. It was a risky plan, one that required trust in people they barely knew, but Elena believed it was the only way to break the cycle of manipulation and secrecy. Daniel initially resisted the idea. "You're asking us to rely on strangers?" he said during one of their late-night discussions. "People we don't even know?" "Yes," Elena replied firmly, "because if we try to do this alone, we'll fail. We need allies, Daniel. Lots of them." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. Together, they reached out to potential partners, building a network of like-minded individuals determined to fight back against the syndicate. Some were hesitant at first, wary of putting themselves in danger, but others joined eagerly, driven by a desire for justice and change. Slowly, the coalition began to take shape, its members scattered across the galaxy but united by a single purpose. As the weeks passed, small victories started to add up. Syndicate operatives were arrested, illegal shipments intercepted, and corrupt officials removed from power. Each success was a blow to the organization's grip on the galaxy, weakening its influence bit by bit. But the syndicate didn't go quietly. Retaliations came swiftly and brutally. Assassinations, sabotage, and covert attacks aimed at destabilizing the fragile alliance between humans and Vaylons. One such attack struck close to home. A bombing on the space station killed several civilians, including a young Veylan child who had become a symbol of hope for many. The tragedy sent shockwaves through both species, reigniting old fears and suspicions. For a moment, it seemed like the peace process might collapse entirely. But instead of retreating, Elena and Daniel doubled down on their efforts, organizing memorials and public events to honor the victims and reaffirm their commitment to unity. During one such event, Elena addressed a crowd of thousands, her voice steady despite the grief weighing heavily on her heart. "They want us to hate each other," she said, gesturing toward the assembled humans and Vaylons. "They want us to turn on each other, so they can stay in control. But we won't let them win, not today, not ever." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring many to redouble their efforts. Even skeptics began to see the value in cooperation, realizing that standing together was the only way to defeat a threat that sought to destroy them all. For Daniel, the journey had changed him in ways he never expected. He no longer saw the Vaylons as enemies. Instead, he viewed them as partners in a shared struggle. Working alongside Commander Liren and others had taught him that courage and determination weren't exclusive to humanity. They transcended species and borders. Though he still carried the scars of battle, both physical and emotional, he also felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he had known before. As the coalition continued its work, uncovering more evidence and exposing more corruption, the syndicate's grip on the galaxy began to falter. Key leaders were arrested, financial networks dismantled, and propaganda campaigns debunked. It was slow, painstaking progress, but it was progress nonetheless. And with each victory, the bonds between humans and Vaylons grew stronger, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by mutual respect. Yet even as hope began to rise, shadows lingered. The Syndicate was wounded, but not defeated. Its agents still operated in secret, plotting their next moves. And somewhere, hidden in the vastness of space, its masterminds watched and waited, biding their time until the moment was right to strike. Again. For now, though, humanity and the Valens stood united, holding their breath as they dared to believe in a brighter future. Diplomats spoke, soldiers stood ready, and the galaxy held its collective breath, poised on the edge of transformation. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The final push against the Syndicate came on a day no one would forget. After months of relentless effort, the coalition led by Elena Ruiz and Daniel Carter had gathered enough evidence to expose the organization's inner workings fully. The data was overwhelming. Encrypted files, intercepted communications, financial records, and witness testimonies, all pointing to a shadowy cabal of powerful figures pulling strings from behind the scenes. These weren't just rogue actors. They were heads of corporations, military leaders, and even high-ranking diplomats, both human and Valen. Elena stood in front of a crowded assembly hall aboard the space station, her voice steady as she addressed hundreds of representatives from across the galaxy. Humans and Valens filled the room, their faces tense with anticipation. Behind her, holographic screens displayed damning evidence, the names, faces, and crimes of those involved. "This is not about revenge," she said, her tone firm but calm. "It's about accountability. We cannot move forward until we confront the truth." Daniel stood nearby, arms crossed, his eyes scanning the crowd. He didn't trust everyone in the room, not yet. But he trusted Elena. She had brought them this far, and now it was time to see if their gamble would pay off. When she finished speaking, a murmur rippled through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, while others whispered angrily, unwilling to believe what they were hearing. But most stayed silent, absorbing the weight of what had been revealed. "Ambassador." Kale stepped forward, his glowing blue eyes fixed on the assembled delegates. "My people have suffered as much as yours," he said, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. "We will not allow fear and greed to dictate our future. If there are those among us who seek to profit from war, then let them answer for their actions." His words struck a chord, breaking through lingering doubts and suspicions. Slowly, cautiously, the tide began to turn. Delegates from both species started calling for action, not retaliation, but justice. Arrest warrants were issued, assets frozen, and investigations launched into every name listed in the evidence. It wasn't perfect and progress was uneven. But for the first time, humanity and the Valens worked side by side toward a common goal. But the Syndicate wasn't finished yet. Retaliations came swiftly and brutally. A series of coordinated attacks targeted key locations, space stations, outposts, and supply lines. Entire colonies were left in chaos as sabotage crippled critical infrastructure. Panic spread quickly, threatening to undo all the hard-won gains. For a moment, it seemed like the fragile alliance might shatter under the pressure. Daniel found himself back on the front lines, leading joint teams of humans and Valens in defensive operations. They fought together, shoulder to shoulder, against mercenaries hired by the Syndicate. Commander Liren proved invaluable during these battles, his tactical expertise complementing Daniel's combat experience. Together, they managed to repel several major assaults, though casualties mounted on both sides. One battle stood out above the rest, a desperate defense of a vital communications hub near the edge of Valon territory. The enemy forces vastly outnumbered them, and reinforcements were hours away. As the fighting raged, Daniel and Liren coordinated their troops, using every trick they knew to hold the line. At one point, Daniel found himself face to face with a towering mercenary leader, a hulking figure clad in black armor. The man swung a massive blade at him, forcing Daniel to dodge and counter with quick, precise strikes. It was brutal, exhausting work, but eventually, Daniel gained the upper hand, disarming his opponent and knocking him unconscious. When the dust settled, the hub remained intact, thanks largely to the combined efforts of human and Valen soldiers. Exhausted but victorious, Daniel looked around at the battlefield, littered with debris and bodies. For the first time, he realized how much had changed, not just in him, but in everyone who had fought alongside him. Trust wasn't something that could be forced or demanded. It had to be earned. And in that moment, standing amidst the ruins, Daniel felt a profound sense of camaraderie, not just with his fellow humans, but with the Valens who had risked everything to protect their shared future. Back on the space station, Elena worked tirelessly to keep morale high despite the setbacks. She organized relief efforts for affected colonies, rallied volunteers to rebuild damaged facilities, and pushed for transparency at every level. Her determination inspired others to follow suit, creating a ripple effect of resilience and cooperation. Even Captain Ryan Harper, once skeptical of diplomacy, began to soften his stance, recognizing the value of working together instead of tearing each other apart. The turning point came when intelligence operatives uncovered the location of the Syndicate's Central Command, a heavily fortified fortress hidden deep within an asteroid belt. Taking it down wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. Without its leadership, the Syndicate would crumble. A joint task force was assembled, composed of the best fighters from both species. Daniel volunteered to lead the mission, knowing full well the risks involved. As the team approached the fortress, tension ran high. Automated turrets fired relentlessly, forcing them to take cover behind jagged rocks. Explosions lit up the darkness, shaking the shuttlecraft violently. Inside, they moved cautiously, disabling traps and neutralizing guards. Every step felt like walking through a nightmare, but they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Finally, they reached the control room, where the Syndicate's mastermind waited, a human woman named Victoria Kane. Tall and elegant, she radiated cold confidence, even surrounded by armed invaders. "You think this changes anything?" she sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. "There will always be those who profit from chaos. You can't stop us all." Daniel stepped forward, his weapon trained on her. "Maybe not," he replied, his voice low and steady. "But we can stop you." With Kane's arrest, the Syndicate's power began to collapse. Its network unraveled rapidly, leaving behind a trail of exposed corruption and shattered alliances. Leaders implicated in the scandal resigned or were removed from power, replaced by individuals committed to reform and transparency. Slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to heal. In the aftermath, humanity and the Valans faced a new challenge, rebuilding trust after years of manipulation and conflict. It wouldn't happen overnight, but small steps became significant strides. Joint projects brought people together, fostering understanding and cooperation. Trade agreements strengthened economic ties, while cultural exchanges helped break down barriers. Memories of war lingered, but so did hope for a better tomorrow. Elena watched it all unfold with quiet pride. She had spent countless sleepless nights wondering if they could truly make a difference. Now, seeing humans and Valans working side by side, she allowed herself a rare moment of optimism. "We've come so far," she told Daniel one evening, as they stood on an observation deck overlooking the stars. "Do you think we'll ever get it right?" Daniel smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the endless expanse of space. "Probably not," he admitted, "but we'll keep trying. That's all we can do." And so, amidst uncertainty and lingering fears, a new chapter began. One where diplomats spoke, soldiers stood ready, and humanity held its breath, daring to believe in a brighter tomorrow. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, they faced it together, not as enemies but as allies united by a shared vision of peace and prosperity.